For decades, cosmologists have been trying to figure out how the universe came to be, and they got very close to the answer. They knew it had something to do with the two big B's, the Big Bang. However, upon closer inspection, there have been traces of another Big B, instrumental to the creation of the universe as we know it, the Bob.
Bonjour, welcome back to my channel. Je m'appelle Emma and today we are going to be speaking about the Bob. Not that Bob, also not that Bob. We're going to be talking about the Bob. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Now I'm going to give you a little brief history of the Bob because I think it's quite essential to what we're going to be speaking about. The Bob was popularized by one specific person, Irene Castle. Now she was a famous dancer as well as actress, specifically a ballroom dancer. She cut her hair into a bob because she was getting her appendix removed. Now I'm not sure if that was necessary, but anyways, she did do that, and she was planning to cover up her hair until it had grown out again, but a friend of hers was like, you know what, just wear it, just rock it, just do it, babe. And she did, and people actually quite liked it. At the time, there was also obviously World War I happening and the women's suffrage movement. Women were entering the workforce, women were helping out, and they found the bob a lot more practical. However, a lot of women didn't want to cut their hair into bobs because it kind of rocked the boat of traditional femininity, and they didn't want to upset or offend the men in their lives, aka mostly their husbands. And the bob was seen as quite a political statement for women. This is because women were pushing back against traditional norms, which I think is a very powerful statement to make. However, there is a reason that when I say cinema and I say bob, you think of French cinema. This is because the popular actress Polaire. Now, Polaire rang a bell in the deep, deep depths of my brain, and I was like, I've heard this before, and I'm sure I've heard it before in one of my film classes. I had a French teacher, she had a bob as well, shout out Sophie. And so I had to Google her, and I know I was supposed to look at her hair, but can I just take a pause? Where is this lady's waist? Where has it gone? Look, this is not normal. I believe they used to call this the wasp waist, and this was done with corsets as well as a griddle. And important to mention, guys, she did actually Facetune herself, okay? So some of the pictures you'll see, there is a blur around her waist. Polaire was actually known to have her bob back in 1890. She was described as having a shock of short, dark hair. As well as in 1909, there was the first celebrity hairstylist, and his name was Antoni Sierpolowski. He popularized his own cut, which was called the shingle cut. Now this was also a bob, and this was inspired by Joan of Arc, and this would be the specific bob that a lot of flappers use. Of course, flappers did end up using a lot of finger waves as well, but this was where a lot of that inspiration came from. The flappers are often accredited with the popularization of the bob, and to think about it, the popularization of the bob is hardly even 100 years old. The bob became a quintessential haircut for the French New Wave films. You know, Alfred Hitchcock had his blondes, but Jean-Luc Godard, he had his bobs. Today I'm going to be talking mostly about characters from films in the last 40 years or so, and talking about how the bob is intertwined with their characters and who and what they might represent. So I think talking about the modern implications of the bob could be quite exciting. In a film, every single thing is a choice. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, that might not mean anything, it probably does mean something. Everything is chosen to represent whatever it is that the story is telling you. So you can read into every single aspect of a film, which makes it so exciting. Regardless, let's get into it. The first bob we're going to be talking about is the fashion bob. To me, the fashion bob is the straight across bob and the straight across bangs. Now, there's an obvious reason why I think of this as the fashion bob, as Miss Queen Anna Wintour herself is and has been dedicated to this haircut for decades, okay? Now, the first person I want to bring up in this conversation actually doesn't have a bob, and it will be the only person I'll be talking about in this entire video that doesn't have a bob, and it's Miranda Priestly in The Devil Wears Prada. Now, The Devil Wears Prada, I see a lot of videos circulating about that now because obviously Devil Wears Prada 2 came out, and they were talking about how a lot of fashion designers were really scared to allow their clothes to be used in the film. This is because they didn't know how Anna Wintour would react to it, because obviously the film was about Vogue and Anna Wintour. But I think it's very interesting that they didn't give Miranda Priestly that same haircut, and I do really like it. I like when a film knows where to cut the line with parody, if that makes sense. But let's talk about some girlies who rock a fashion bob and rock it well. I mean, let's talk about the most obvious fashion bob of all time, Edna Mode. It is literally just the jet black same bob as Anna Wintour. She is a a fashion girly through and through. She's literally a designer, obviously. And I just love it. It speaks so much to her character. The fashion bob just is one of those ones that comes with characters that are heavily intertwined with fashion. And sometimes it comes with characters that really want to mask themselves with their fashion and look, such as Elvira from Scarface. Now, it's important to note that Elvira from Scarface actually precedes Anna Wintour with the fashion bob. Scarface came out in 1983, which funnily enough, Anna Wintour actually joined Vogue in 1983, so the same year, and she did already have the bob on, but she wasn't the editor-in-chief yet. So I will say that Elvira definitely precedes Anna Wintour with the fashion bob. Anna Wintour didn't become editor-in-chief until 1988, I believe. Elvira has that very cool girl energy, and she's coined as this ice queen character, and she uses her razor sharp hair as a disguise and as a curtain to her true self. She doesn't want to show who she really is. Definitely uses her fashion to her advantage because she knows that in this very superficial world, her looks are the only thing that really matters. Another one's Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction, as well as Drew Barrymore in Scream. Now, funnily enough, the wig that they used on Drew Barrymore for Scream was quite literally made after Elvira. So it was a literal copy-paste situation. While she obviously isn't in the film for very long, it makes quite a heavy statement. Next is the anti-establishment bob. By the way, a lot of the different bobs that I'm talking about can fit in more than one category. I've just organized it this way, all right? But these are characters that I specifically think they gave a bob to in order to mirror the women's suffrage movement and feminism. So these are characters that are questioning their establishment in a feminist way. First one's Jane Lane from Daria. I mean, she gets up to a lot of anti-establishment antics in that whole series, so I'm not even gonna get too specific about that one. But the one I do want to get specific on is Joanna Mason from The Hunger Games, Catching Fire specifically. Obviously, she's not in the first one. I mean, she is extremely anti-establishment. She is not a fan of President Snow, and she is ready to shout it out.
Well, you know what? That! Everybody that had anything to do with it! What if we set your backyard on fire?
I think a lot of these women that have the anti-establishment bob are very outspoken about it. They're not quietly sitting on the sidelines. They're on the field, if not streaking on the field, okay? As well as that, I want to say Bianca from 10 Things I Hate About You. Now, that might be a controversial take, but in this film, to me, the establishment is her father, and her father says she cannot date. And while he comes from a place of protectiveness because he understands what boys her age, what their intentions might actually be.
Every time you even think about kissing a boy, I want you to picture wearing this under your halter top.
Another part of him is that he has this very view on, I guess, female sexuality.
No dating till you graduate. Number 2, no dating till you graduate.
She's a teenager, so all she wants to do is engage with boys, and she wants to engage in romance, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And she's very outspoken about that, and she, for the most part, I feel like, kind of pushes this feminist agenda of, I want to be able to make my own mistakes. I'm old enough, and I believe I have the right to make my own mistakes. And I think that's very feminist. I mean, I think in a lot of feminist movements, we see sexual liberation movements, so it goes hand in hand, really. And her sister is Kat, after all. I'm sure that during their time growing up, she picked up a thing or two.
My insurance does not cover PMS.
While they might have different goals in life, I do think they have a similar-ish attitude about some things. Next is the wig bob. Now, I love the wig bob. This is not an actress who is wearing a wig and we don't know she's wearing a wig. This is not Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction kind of situation. This is the character is canonically wearing a wig in the film. And this wig happens to be a bob. And usually a little bit of a colorful one as well, which is interesting. Now, wigs in film in general often mean a hidden identity or wanting to conform to societal pressures. Although I think in the situation of these women, that is not necessarily the case. I think because their wigs are so colorful, it's not really about conforming. I think it's more about hiding and maybe choosing where you are vulnerable. I also saw an interesting comment from critics which said the wig provides an aura of plasticity that people adopt when forced to be vulnerable. But it's interesting because the wigs are used in very different ways. Vivian from Pretty Woman, for example, she wears her wig, but she wears this wig because of her job. She wants to protect herself. She probably wants to protect part of her identity, but I think she also wants to protect herself and her vulnerability because what her job needs for her to do is for her to detach herself from her feelings and her wants and her needs, really, to be honest with you. And as the film goes on, she obviously takes that wig off and she becomes more vulnerable and she starts being able to show her true self a lot more. Charlotte in Lost in Translation is another character that wears a wig bob. She wears a very pink one. Now, I read some articles about this, and obviously the pink bob was also part of Japanese culture and wanting to fit in with that. But I saw a really interesting take, which was that when she puts on the bob, she's finally able to let her hair down. And it's because she has a little bit of a disguise on that she's not afraid to let her vulnerability out. She has this shield, this wig that she uses to almost detach herself a little bit from herself, and that makes her able to be more vulnerable in the moment, if that makes sense. It's also a form of escapism, of course, and also a huge part of the sad girl aesthetic. Now we've seen this on Tumblr and all that. It has very colorful hair and you know the vibe. I mean, I'll pop some pictures, you'll get the vibe what I'm saying. Now, Promising Young Woman and the Batman have more obvious uses of wigs as well. So in Promising Young Woman, Cassandra uses the wig for disguise, as well as Catwoman in the Batman using the wig for disguise. But Cassandra, her wig's quite interesting because it's very doll-like, and it's just a sharp contrast with the darker themes that go on in the story. And it also represents this innocence and this innocence that she's avenging. So you can definitely tweak the wig to whatever you want it to be because it can tell you so much. Catwoman's wigs are also for disguise. It also shows the playfulness. She is Catwoman. She is quirky like a cat, and it shows this playfulness to the character. It's quite fun when you get to have a character such as Catwoman who behaves to what their character is named, if that makes sense. But it's also part of this mask of performance that she has on. She is pretending to be someone a lot of the time, and then when she sheds her wig,
I know, wig, I feel that already.
and we see her for who she truly is, it's that much more stark of a contrast. Now, the wig used in Closer by Natalie Portman's character is very similar to the wig used in Lost in Translation, Also Pink. When she's wearing that wig and heavy makeup, it's the first time she reveals her true identity. So she uses the wig similarly to hide herself because the truth is much less scary when you aren't who you really are in that moment, if that makes sense. But ultimately, I think most people know the pink wig and know her look in the pink wig. It's quite iconic. So that's why I wanted to speak on that one specifically. Next is characters that specifically cut a bob in the film. Now, these are very similar to the anti-establishment bobs and have very similar reasons why the characters do this, but I think they're interesting.
And of course, I have a stripe.
But I think they're very interesting because the characters are actually cutting their hair within the film itself. So I want to give it a different category because I do think it's a different action because it's intentionally happening while we're watching the character's arc. Now, the first one's obviously Amy Dunn in Gone Girl. This iconic scene is her stripping away that cool girl persona. She acts this way in order to make her partner feel bigger, essentially. Cutting hair in film often means rebirth. It means gaining control. It means independence, rebellion, and cutting specifically into a bob definitely shows that control. She's shedding this cool girl persona she's put on. She removes that pristineness from herself and starts to become a lot more blunt. The bob, the blunt. Another great example would be Jo from Little Women. She cuts her hair to make money for her family so that her mom can go and tend to their very sick father. This is, again, very similar. She's taking back her autonomy by doing something that women did back in the day to fight for their rights. And this is very interesting because Little Women is set in the 1860s, so she was definitely ahead of even Polaire with that one. Another great example of this is Natalie Portman's character Matilda in Leon the Professional. She's cutting her hair to show age as well. She's showing that she's older now, she has her own autonomy, she's making her own decisions, and she's shedding herself of her youth. I love the cutting hair in film. I think it's such a great little psychological quirk to throw in there, and I think it's just such a strong character move to do anyway. I'm just always a fan of a dramatic change in a character, and I think showing that visually just adds to it so much. But I do also like when a character takes control of their own agency. Yeah. Next is the colorful bob. Okay, the colorful bob, I feel like in general usually just means a very much quirkiness in the character. Lilu from Fifth Element, for example, she's a very quirky gal and she has that very bright orange bob. Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim is such a great example as well. She's quite quirky. She's that very manic pixie dream girl-esque character, and she obviously has her hair changed throughout the film as well, which I think is really fun. Very similar to Kate Winslet's character in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, but she does not have a bob, so she's not in the conversation. Another one I thought of was Coraline. Coraline actually technically has blue hair, and she's this very quirky girl who lives in this fantasy world, and she goes in and, I mean, it's quite the nightmare world, to be honest with you, but regardless, it is a fantasy world. A dystopian fantasy, but a fantasy nonetheless. Now, we could go in depth on every single color, but I don't think that's necessary in this situation. But I will say that pink is often used to sign innocence. Purple or violet or blue is usually mystery. And red and orange definitely more a fiery personality. Now, these are very shorthand ways used to show what a character is like without them even having to speak yet. I love when a character has colorful hair, not from a wig, just because the character so chooses to have that. I think it tells you so much about them, and you can definitely, like Ramona Flowers, change up that hair to show the arc of the character as well. I do think that also colorful hair is very like indie cinema coded. I think a lot of indie cinema also loves that sad girl aesthetic, and I think that all goes hand in hand. It's just an aesthetic thing as well, obviously. But yeah, colorful hair usually represents some type of mystery, quirky gal, and often also a very sad girl and that aesthetic. And next is a very interesting little bob. Now, I have to say that this is probably one of the less sophisticated reasons to have a bob on a character, but nonetheless, I see it a lot. This is the smart girl bob. This is when a character is a very beautiful woman, but she's very smart. So how can we show that she's beautiful and smart? I know. We cut her hair. Now, I will say that a lot of the times they also use pixie cuts to show this, but I will say there's a lot of characters I could think of that have that bob and are the smart girl. The first one that came to mind is Scully from X-Files. Now, Gillian Anderson is a beautiful woman. She's a practical job. She needs practical hair. It makes sense for the character and it suits her. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I do think that it's definitely something that they use to show this lady, she is clever. Another one is Velma from Scooby-Doo. Now, they do the double whammy. They also give her glasses. They're like, this girl, guys, she's not one time smart because she has a bob. She's 2 times smart because she's a bob and she has glasses. We do see her without her glasses. We do see her without her glasses in the movie, that's for sure. Another one I thought of was Miranda Hobbs in Sex and the City. Now, she's definitely the smart girl. She is the high-class lawyer. High-class lawyer, is that what you say? She is the corporate lawyer of the group and she's a very clever lady. I think they definitely start her off more boyish, but she does have the pixie cut at that time. Whereas later in the series, she definitely sports the bob. And don't come to me with these edits of Miranda Hobbs with long hair. Miranda Hobbs is a bob slash pixie girl hair character. It suits her, it makes sense for her, and I cannot imagine her without it. So I don't like this romanticization that she needs to have long hair. She's very much against the patriarchy. She's very much for women's rights, and she's constantly talking about this. It makes sense for her character, and it reflects that 1920s flapper and women's suffrage movement bob agenda, the bob agenda of the 1920s, okay? Another one I thought of was Lucy from Lucy. ScarJo with the bob. Yeah, it makes sense. She also actually has the fashion bob at one moment with the black bangs, but that's purely disguise, I would say, because she's going through the airport. So we won't talk about that part, but she is, if not the smartest woman to ever be in film, technically. I mean, she literally has 100% brain capacity, and they were like, no, guys, she's too much brain capacity. We need to cut her hair. Like, we need to show these people that, like, she's for real smart. Not just, like, kind of smart. Like, she's for real smart. Cut her hair. Next is the sporty bob. The sporty bob is very similar to the smart girl bob. We have this beautiful woman and she's very sporty. So how are we going to show the audience that she's very sporty? Well, cut her hair. Cut her hair. Either way, it makes sense. I have seen girls with shorter hair play sports. However, I will say I've had a bob and I hated doing sports in a bob because I couldn't quite tie it up and it kept touching the nape of my neck, which is where obviously you will sweat. Probably the pixie cut is what makes most sense. And obviously there are sporty girls that wear the pixie cut, very similar to the smart girl situation. It's again, just a visual shorthand to show you these girls are sporty, AKA they lean more towards masculine hobbies. So we must use the 1920s bob agenda on these characters. Some examples are Juliet from Bend It Like Beckham. She's a very sporty gal, makes sense for her to have shorter hair. Although she sports a bob. Some people online say she's more Bixie leaning, which is bob mixed with a pixie cut. I want to say she's much more bob leaning, but to each their own. I don't know. What do you think? Another one's Tashi Duncan from Challengers. Now it's funny because when she's actually playing sports, she has long hair. And I think that the short hair is also used as a shorthand way to tell you that we're now farther along in life and she's aged and she's more mature now. But I do think that they also used it a little bit to show that she is still in that sporty world. Because she's not able to do the sports, they have to show that she still looks like she has the interest of the sports. I mean, she's a coach now. Another character is Margot Tenenbaum from the Royal Tenenbaums. Now, in many articles where I was reading about bobs, it said that she's not really known for scoring points on the court. She is more known to slump around with a tennis racket. And I respect it. That is still a sport. It is a sport to be the sad girl, especially one with a tennis racket. So regardless, I'm adding her into this category. Cameron Diaz from Charlie's Angels. I would say she's on the sportier side. I guess they're all quite sporty because they're all spies and they're very acrobatically advanced, I would say. Regardless, she's definitely the sportiest feeling one of them all, but I think that any group of multiple gals, you will have the sportier girl or the more boyish girl. I mean, if you throw 10 girls in a room, one of them is going to be probably in a bob. Alex from Totally Spies. This one was one of the first ones I thought of. She definitely has that more tomboyish, sporty feel to her. Another one I would say for sure is Violet Beauregard. Beauregard? She is in a tracksuit. She goes to the chocolate factory in a tracksuit. Need I say more? Also, she turned into a blueberry. So it makes sense. I mean, her bob was kind of like foreshadowing for the blueberry moment. Dare I say? Next is the curly bob. Now, I love the curly bob. I am a huge fan of the curly bob. If there is no fans of the curly bob, I'm dead. Curly hair in film often means a free-spirited character, or can be interlinked with the hippie and psychedelic movement as well. So it's very fun, but I think when they pop it into a bob, adds this very flirty and charming effect to the character. Now, I have Miss Curly Bob #1 offender right next to me over here. Miss Marilyn Monroe. By the way, I am not sponsored by Sight and Sound, but I'm very open to the opportunity, so let me know. Regardless, I feel like the flirty bob is that optimist, flirty, charming character, and it adds such a quirk to the character as well. Some great examples are many of the characters that Marilyn Monroe plays, including her character in Some Like It Hot. Barbara Streisand in A Star Is Born, I think, is such a great example of that as well. Frances from Dirty Dancing is a great example as well. She's deeply invested in social justice, again, that 1920s Bob agenda. And she does have that sexual awakening within the film as well. Again, that flirty aspect to the hair. Another great example is Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City, of course, if not the most charming, flirty character of all time. And Ty from Clueless. Ty from Clueless is such a quirky, fun, flirty, charming character. It just works so well with her. And I think the thing about the bouncy and curly bob is that these characters aren't afraid to be seen. And I think that's such an interesting aspect of a character. That volume, there's no way to hide behind. I mean, obviously they can hide behind the hair, but it's not in the same way as the razor sharp, blunt bangs and bob where they're hiding behind a literal curtain. I think these women are very confident. I think they're so fun and exciting to watch. Whenever I see a character with a curly bob, I know I am in for a ride. Another bob is the bumped bob. Now, this has a very vintage feel to the character, and I feel like this creates a very ageless persona. A timeless classic, if you will. I think sometimes these characters represent more an idea than necessarily a person. An example of this might be Alice Cullen. She is such a cool character. Again, this is Bixie territory. It's very divided online, but it has that essential short, bumped ends look, and it's definitely a little bit longer than a pixie, I want to say. Scarlet Overkill as well. I think this is used as well to show time, because the Minions film takes place way before they meet Gru, or well, they meet Gru at the end of the film, to show that this was a long time ago, and it has that very vintage feeling, that little bump at the bottom. And Daisy from Girl Interrupted, she has that very vintage look to her as well. She has that very obsessive character aspect to her, as she does have OCD as well as bulimia, which are often correlated to characters that obviously need control. And another example of this might be Monica Geller, who also sports a bob, but it's not a bumped bob. I think bumped bobs are often also just showing the time period and just having a vintage feel to the film as well. Now, the next category is an interesting one. It's the male bob. Yeah. Now, following all the things that I said about women, bobs, and where bobs come from, you think that maybe a male bob was to show a more feminine man, but that's not necessarily true. From what I found, it actually shows a very unhinged male character. Women get a bob to show control. Men get a bob when they're losing control. Whether that's control of their ethics, morality, the world's ethics, morality, societal norms, things like that, they are losing control in some aspect of that. Some examples of this. Haymitch from The Hunger Games. Unhinged, for sure, I would say. Maybe he didn't start out that way, but he ended up being that way, and when he didn't start out that way, he actually had a different haircut, so that might make sense. I would say Lord Farquaad. He's just losing control. He has... I think he might just be compensating for something. I don't know. No Country for Old Men. Javier Bardem plays Anton. He's a villain. He is unhinged. So I feel like it's definitely a good divide between unhinged and losing control. I would say that any character that acts like Anton has lost the ability to care. He's in the IDGAF war, and he's winning. Another one I believe is James from Pokemon. And that man is unhinged and I respect it. He also has blue hair, so he's also a little bit more quirky, as is Jessie, but she obviously doesn't have a bob, even though she does want to be in control. So maybe we need to go back to the drawing books and figure that one out. In all, the bob plays such an important part in cinema. Coming from the French New Wave, coming from the flappers, coming from Polaire. Thank you everyone who has sported the bob before it was popular, because it's such a shorthand way of showing what a character might be like and what to expect from this person. Again, it's also a great way to subvert what we think a character might do and show us something completely different. I would say that the bob has become to hair like what a primary color is to the color wheel. It has become quintessential, it's so important, and it's just there and it will never go away. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It makes it a lot easier for me to make videos in the future. And as always, it was a pleasure having you here. Mwah.